This research paper explores the encoding of linguistic information in transformer-based sentence embeddings, focusing on identifying specific regions within these embeddings that contain information about chunks such as noun, verb, or prepositional phrases, grammatical number, and semantic roles. Utilizing datasets with known sentence structures, the study analyzes how different types of linguistic information are localized in sentence embeddings. Previous analyses have shown that transformer models encode a variety of linguistic information, but there is a lack of understanding on how this information is reflected in the model's output, particularly in sentence embeddings. The paper questions whether sentence embeddings systematically encode arbitrarily long and complex sentences in a fixed-sized vector and what kind of information they contain. Understanding the encoding of linguistic information in sentence embeddings has several benefits, including connecting internal changes in the model parameters and structure with changes in its outputs, verifying the robustness of models, and helping to maximize the use of training data for developing more robust models from smaller textual resources. The paper also discusses the limitations of current transformer models, which use a token-focused learning objective and have a weaker supervision signal at the sentence level. Despite this, they still manage to encode a variety of linguistic information and perform well in various tasks. However, direct exploration of BERT sentence embeddings has shown that they contain mostly shallow information related to sentence length and lexical variation, with many dimensions being correlated, indicating redundant or non-useful information. The authors propose a different view, suggesting that information in sentence embeddings is not overtly encoded in each principal component dimension, but rather distributed across specific regions. They aim to uncover these regions by using targeted sparsification, which could help in understanding current transformer models and building future explainable neural models. This study explores the idea that sentence embeddings can be decomposed into constituent parts, much like audio signals are composed of overlapping frequencies. The goal is to determine whether specific chunks of a sentence, such as nouns, verbs, or prepositional phrases, are encoded in distinct layers and regions of a sentence embedding. To investigate this, the researchers employed a variational encoder-decoder system, which has been shown to effectively detect targeted grammatical phenomena. This system compresses input information into a low-dimensional latent vector, and previous research has demonstrated that sentence embeddings and their compressed representations on the latent layer encode information about chunks and their linguistic properties. The study addresses two primary research questions. First, whether targeted sparsification of the system maintains high performance, indicating that information about chunks is localizable, and second, if so, tracing back the signal from the latent layer to the input sentence embeddings to analyze how specific differences in chunk properties are reflected and localized. The research builds upon previous work on sentence embeddings using transformer models, which induce contextual token embeddings through successive layers using multi-head attention. Variations of the BERT transformer model have been developed, differing in training methods, combination of positional and token embeddings, and input presentation. Sentence-level supervision signals, such as next sentence prediction and sentence order prediction, have also been utilized. Previous work has probed embeddings and models for linguistic information, analyzing model architecture and induced token embeddings to determine the localization and flow of information. Task-specific classifiers have been used to test whether sentence representations contain specific types of linguistic information. Ultimately, the study tackles the issue of sparsification in deep learning models, which have billions of parameters, making them difficult to comprehend and expensive to train. Transformer-based models have revolutionized natural language processing, but the intricacies of their output remain poorly understood. This study delves into the realm of sentence embeddings, exploring whether specific sentence properties can be pinpointed within these embeddings. To achieve this, the authors employed targeted sparsification on an encoder-decoder architecture, compressing sentence embeddings into a latent representation that preserves information about sentence chunks. This compression enables the isolation of distinct parts of the sentence embedding, allowing the tracing of signals from the latent layer back to the original sentence embeddings. The goal is to determine whether information about different chunk numbers or chunk properties is encoded. Two datasets are utilized, one featuring sentences with known chunk structures and properties, and two multiple-choice problem datasets that require understanding chunk structures and properties. The first dataset consists of ordered pairs of input sentences and 7 output sentences, with only one output sentence sharing the same chunk pattern as the input sentence. This dataset is split into train, development, and test sets. The second dataset, Blackbird Language Matrices, is a language-based adaptation of the Visual Raven progressive matrices, comprising multiple-choice problems where the input is a sequence of 7 sentences built using specific rules. The objective is to identify the correct output sentence based on the input sequence. By applying targeted sparsification, the authors aim to identify specific regions of the sentence embeddings that contribute to different aspects of linguistic information, such as chunk structure and properties. This research contributes to the ongoing efforts to understand the internal workings of transformer models, ultimately improving their efficiency and interpretability. Through this study, the authors seek to understand how transformer-based models represent linguistic information in their output and how this information can be localized and utilized for solving language tasks. By shedding light on the intricate mechanisms of sentence embeddings, this research paves the way for the development of more accurate and efficient language models. In natural language processing, the BLM agreement and verb alternation problems are key challenges. These involve identifying entities, their attributes, and connecting operators within a sentence sequence. To tackle these issues, researchers utilize datasets such as BLM-AGRF for subject-verb agreement in French and BLM's LA for sprayload verb alternations in English. Each dataset is divided into training and testing subsets, with varying amounts of lexical variation across different types. The primary goal of solving a BLM instance is to generate a sentence representation that closely matches one of the provided answer sets. The information necessary to solve the agreement task is more structural, while the verb alternation task requires both structural and semantic information. Experiments conducted include testing a sparse variational encoder-decoder system's ability to distill information about chunk structure from sentence embeddings, analyzing the sparse model to understand where differences are encoded, and combining the sparsified variational encoder-decoder with another VI-LK layer to solve BLM tasks. These experiments utilize the Electra model for sentence representations, reshaped as a two-dimensional array with a shape of 32 by 24. These studies aim to enhance our understanding of how language models process and represent complex linguistic phenomena, ultimately improving their performance on tasks requiring nuanced comprehension of syntax and semantics. The experimental analysis focuses on the average F1 score across 3 runs, with a particular emphasis on the compressed vectors in the latent layer. This is done to determine whether chunk patterns are encoded in these vectors, which would indicate that sentence chunk patterns are detected and encoded differently in the latent layer. The adopted sparsification approach builds upon the work of Nastase and Merlo, 2024, who demonstrated that sentence embeddings contain information about chunk structure and properties using an encoder-decoder architecture. This architecture compresses relevant information into a small latent layer, making grammatical information more accessible. The encoder architecture consists of a convolutional neural network, CNN, layer followed by a feed-forward neural network, FFNN. The CNN layer detects different patterns in the sentence representation on each of its 40 channels, and the linear layer compresses the linearized output of the CNN into a very small latent layer. A vector is then sampled from this latent layer and decoded into a sentence representation using a decoder that mirrors the encoder. The system is guided to capture information about the chunk structure of sentences in the latent layer using a max margin loss function. This loss function assigns a higher score to the correct option relative to others and is defined as the sum of the max margin function and the Kullback-Leibler divergence between the input sentence embedding and a standard normal distribution. To sparsify the network in a targeted way, each output unit from the CNN layer is enforced to contribute to only one unit in the latent layer. This is achieved by applying a mask to the weights of the FFNN, computing a masked weight matrix, and using a kernel with a clear separation of information flow from the sentence embedding to the latent layer. Neural network sparsification is explored in the context of encoder-decoder models, with a focus on configuring the learned network to connect each latent unit to a distinct set of CNN output nodes. This is achieved through a harsh sparsification technique, which channels information from sentence embeddings into few paths en route to the latent layer. Despite this, results show only a small decrease in average F1 score, standard deviation over 3 runs, from 0.997, 0.0035, to 0.977, 0.0095. TSNE projections reveal a noticeable difference in the latent layer, where the full network exhibits clear and crisp separation of latents encoding different chunk patterns, with a high F1 macroaverage, standard deviation of 0.9928, 0.0101. In contrast, the sparsified network's latent layer displays slightly less crisp separation in the 2D TSNE projection, yet maintains a high F1 macroaverage, standard deviation of 0.9886, 0.0038. The localization of linguistic information in sentence embeddings is also investigated. It is hypothesized that the CNN discovers different patterns in various sentence regions, and these signals reach the latent layer. To verify this, the distribution of values in each network node in the encoder is analyzed, including CNN output nodes and latent nodes. The authors define SP as the set of input sentences sharing the same chunk pattern pages. They then pass sentence embeddings through the learned encoder, gathering values in each CNN output node, and compare sets of sentences with minimally different patterns to check for differences in sentence pattern encoding. Analysis of sentence embeddings reveals how different chunk patterns are encoded in the model. The authors focus on 3 specific sentence patterns: subject-verb number alternation, length variation, and grammatical number variation. A 2-sample Kolmogorov-Smirnov test filters out CNN output nodes that do not encode differences in behavior between these patterns, removing 83 out of 240 nodes. The remaining nodes are analyzed for their value distributions, with a cosine distance score calculated to quantify the differences in encoding for each pair of minimally different patterns. This analysis reveals that few channel sentence region combinations encode differences in chunk structure, primarily localized at the bottom part of the sentence embedding. Furthermore, the paper explores the use of a 2-level variational encoder-decoder for BLM tasks. This model compresses sentence embeddings into a small latent vector, which represents the input sequence. The sequence representation is further compressed and decoded into a sentence representation that best matches the correct answer. The performance of the sparsified 2-level VAE on BLM tasks is evaluated, with only the first level of the VAE being sparsified. This approach enables the identification of salient features in sentence embeddings that are crucial for capturing chunk patterns, ultimately enhancing the model's ability to process and generate human-like language. Figure 6 reveals the average cosine distance between value distributions in each CNN output node, showcasing distinct patterns of sentence embeddings that differ in grammatical number attributes, length, or subject-verb number. The kernel size and stride effects on the latent units are illustrated, with stronger colors indicating higher values. The performance of 3 system variations is evaluated through the average F1 scores over 3 runs for the BLM agreement and verb alternations tasks, namely ALT-ATL and ATL-ALT, as shown in Figure 7. A 2-level variational encoder-decoder architecture is presented in Figure 8, where the top level compresses sentence embeddings into a latent layer, and the bottom level utilizes the compressed sentence representations to solve BLM tasks. The performance comparison of 3 system variations is discussed: a 1-level VAE, a 2-level VAE, and a sparsified version of the sentence-level VAE in the 2-level VAE. The results indicate that sparsification does not significantly impact performance for either BLM task, as the system relies on chunk information and properties to solve the task successfully. However, 2 main changes are observed. In the agreement task, the sparsified system experiences a performance drop when trained on maximally lexically different data, type 3, similar to the 2-level system without sparsification. This may be attributed to the ambiguous supervision signal at the sentence level. In the verb alternation task, previous results on predicting agent theme location or agent location theme alternations produced similar results, but additional analysis is required to understand the current findings. This research aims to investigate how information is encoded in sentence embeddings, building upon previous studies on the topic. A recent study delves into the encoding of linguistic information within neural network models, specifically focusing on sentence embeddings and their capacity to capture chunk structure properties. This research leverages a custom dataset of sentences exhibiting precise chunk structures and utilizes two multiple-choice tasks that necessitate information about sentence chunks and their properties for successful completion. The authors employ a sparsified encoder-decoder system to compress sentence representations into a latent layer that effectively encodes chunk structure properties. Subsequent analysis reveals that a small subset of channel sentence area combinations are instrumental in capturing such information. Notably, supplementary experiments conducted on the multiple-choice tasks affirm that chunk information, as well as their associated grammatical properties, are successfully encoded at the sparsified sentence compression level. Key findings suggest that a significant proportion of the latent space in sentence embeddings corresponds to encoding linguistic structures such as noun and verb phrases, relative clause and verb-phrase relations. However, these findings should be contextualized with respect to the artificially constructed nature of the dataset and its focus on relatively simple chunk structures. This underscores the necessity for future studies to incorporate more complex sentence structures, such as those containing multiple embeddings and cross-phrase relations, as well as investigate methods to improve parameter control and refine localization of encoded linguistic information. The development of language models has witnessed significant advancements, particularly with the introduction of BERT and its variants. Devlin et al. 2019 introduced BERT, a deep bidirectional transformer for language understanding that has revolutionized the field. In parallel, the lottery ticket hypothesis proposed by Frankel and Carbon, 2018, suggests that overparameterized neural networks contain smaller sub-networks capable of achieving the same accuracy with fewer parameters. This concept is further explored in the context of BERT through the work of He et al. 2020, on DeBerta, a decoding-enhanced BERT model with disentangled attention. Hewitt and Manning, 2019, developed a structural probe for finding syntax in word representations, which is essential for understanding how language models process and represent linguistic information. The concept of task-specific skill localization in fine-tuned language models, as discussed in Panigrahi et al. 2023, highlights the adaptability and specialization of these models based on the tasks they are trained for. Deep subject-hood features in multilingual BERT, researched by Papadimitriou et al. 2021, demonstrate the model's ability to capture complex linguistic phenomena across languages. Sentence BERT, developed by Reimers and Gurevich, 2019, uses Siamese BERT networks for sentence embeddings, providing a more nuanced understanding of sentence-level semantics. Rogers et al. 2020 provide a comprehensive primer on BERTology, detailing what is known about how BERT works. The concept of sparse neural networks, proposed by Louis-Hoz et al. 2018, involves learning sparse neural networks through L_0 regularization, potentially leading to more efficient models. Finally, Savarese et al. 2020 discuss winning the lottery with continuous sparsification, suggesting potential future directions for improving language models. Overall, this review presents a thorough overview of the evolution and improvements made to BERT, along with insights into its inner workings and potential future directions for research. The research paper by Tenney, Das, and Pavlik, 2019a, provides an in-depth analysis of BERT, a pre-trained language model that has achieved state-of-the-art results across various natural language processing tasks. This work demonstrates how BERT effectively rediscovers the classical NLP pipeline, leveraging contextualized word representations to perform well on a wide range of linguistic tasks. The author's findings suggest that BERT's contextualized word representations are capable of capturing both high-level semantic and syntactic features, as well as low-level subword information. Tenney et al. 2019b further probed for sentence structure in contextualized word representations, revealing that these models can capture various aspects of sentence structure, including subject-verb agreement, tense, and CO reference. In addition to these studies, Vaswani et al. 2017 introduced the transformer model, which relies solely on self-attention mechanisms to process input sequences in parallel. This architecture has since become a cornerstone in many state-of-the-art language models, including BERT. Moreover, Wilson, Petty, and Frank, 2023, explored the abstractness of linguistic generalization in large language models, focusing on argument structure. Their experiments showed that while these models can learn abstract representations of linguistic structures, they struggle to generalize these representations to unseen linguistic contexts. Finally, Yi et al. 2022 investigated the understanding of English verb classes and alternations in large pre-trained language models. Their findings indicate that these models exhibit varying degrees of understanding of different verb classes and alternations, with some models demonstrating better performance than others in certain tasks. Overall, this body of research highlights the complexities and nuances of pre-trained language models like BERT, emphasizing both their strengths and limitations in capturing linguistic structures and generalizing to new contexts. These studies contribute to our understanding of how these models process and represent language, shedding light on areas for future improvement and exploration.